Okay, we want to be able to run two pieces of wood through here at the same time. One, we want to be putting this back relief cut on, and the other one we want to actually be going ahead and putting the profile on the face. Because the cutting depth of the two knives is a little bit different, we're going to need to shim this up. And so I've done is I've made a little shim. It's just a piece of about 1/8 inch masonite, and I've attached a board at the end, and I'm just going to slide it in between my guides, and this stop block will keep it from being pulled on through, and that's going to allow me basically to work twice as fast when I'm doing the front and the back of this casing trim at the same time. So I think we're ready to make some casing trim. We're going to go ahead and put the top back on and plug it in. When you're cutting molding, there's some principles that you can follow to try and ensure that you get the best cut possible out of each board. Most people know that when you're joining a board, you want the grain of the board to be going over the top of the cutter knife so that the cutter knife's going like this. If the grain's like this, it'll tear out. Same thing really with planing. So what I want to do is I'm getting ready to run these two boards for molding is look at the edge of the board and generally see which way is the grain on the edge going to be. The thing I have to remember, my molder knife is coming this direction. Since it's coming this direction, so I want, in essence, to have the grain of the board angling down as it goes into the molder on the face profile. The back profile doesn't really matter. So I'm going to start out, and we'll do the back relief cut on a piece first. Then we'll turn it over and run it through to profile the face while we are putting the back relief on the second piece. Most of the time, I simply run a single knife in the planer head to make molding. But occasionally, if I want to really be running a high volume of molding or I want to go a little bit faster, I'll actually get a set of 3 knives. Now, when you're doing that, you also have to have 3 gibs that are the same weight. And so what I've done is I just have 3 aluminum gibs that are actually much longer than I need, but they'll work pretty well for any knife that I might want to put in here. But the big challenge is, how do you get the knives all set in the same spot on the planer head? Here's what I do, and it's pretty simple. Again, I'm from Arkansas, I like simple things. I'm going to come in and put the aluminum gib in. I'm going to take the first planer knife and put it in. I've got just a stick of wood that I've cut, that's the length I want to set up. I just push that molder knife over against the block of wood, and I'm going to tighten these up. And when you're using a longer gib like this, you just tighten the ones that are holding the knife up, and then you just want to kind of barely snug up the ones that are outside of that. When it comes time to set the next one, just spin around, put the aluminum gib in, set the knife in, push it over against, and I can set all 3 knives that way and be certain that they're as close as possible to the same location in the planer head. I'm getting ready to run 2 different moldings at the same time, which sometimes we'll do. The machine has enough power that it can easily run 2 moldings of different profiles at the same time. We've set up the 2 different profiles on 2 different sides of the machine so that we'll get the maximum down pressure from our feed rollers while we're running 2 moldings that may be a little bit different in depth. And what we're going to do first is run the bigger piece through and get the planer head set for the bigger profile, and then we will run the smaller piece through and see if we have to shim it up any to make it cut at the right depth. A lot of times I'll have maybe 3 or 4 different moldings set up in the planer head, but when I'm doing that, I'm only going to run one at a time, and so you raise up and down the bed for each one. But in this instance, we want to run 2 at one time, so we're going to need to probably add a shim to get the right cutting depth for the 2 different profiles. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the machine on, and because I haven't done any setting of the depth for this molding yet, we'll actually have to raise the bed up, and you'll hear the knife cutting into the guide board probably a little bit. And then we're going to start running it through, and I'll just slowly adjust the depth until I get the depth that I want in this molding, and then we'll see what adjustment we're going to have to make on the smaller molding. Here's the way the molding knife on the smaller molding's cutting right now. This is the profile we want. So I'd say that we need to shim up really just about a strong 1/8 underneath it to get the profile we want. So what we'll do is just get a piece of shim material, probably a piece of masonite, and put it in this slot over here so that it will hold the piece up and we'll cut exactly the profile we want. Now, I've added this shim, which is just a piece of 1/4-inch plywood, and I took a small screw and screwed it into the bed board down at the other end. So now we're ready to run this through and see how it works out. So now that we're set with our shim, we're ready to start running molding. And again, we're going to get twice as much production because we can run both this small piece and this wider piece at the same time. I once heard a story about a Woodmaster owner who was working in his shop, and his young son was there and decided to mix together all the parts, all the gibs and counterbalances, so he had a real problem. Here's what you do if you're ever getting a situation where you're not quite sure whether you've got the right gibs and the counterbalances all together. Take the knife and the gib and weigh them, and this is actually just a fairly inexpensive postal scale that you can get just about anywhere. And so what you're going to do is weigh the knife and the gib, and then to double check and see, this counterbalance and this steel gib should weigh just about the same. They actually weigh maybe about a 1/2 ounce more, and in my experience, it's probably okay for these counterbalances to weigh just a little bit more than the knife, but you probably don't want the knife to weigh a lot more than the counterbalances. So anyway, if you're ever in doubt about whether you've got the right counterbalances with the knife, it's probably a good idea to get a postal scale and just check.